One of the quotations that I found most generative is this quotation from Rudolfo Linas in his book called Eye of the Vortex, where he says that all thinking is internalized movement. All thinking is internalized movement. As I say, I just found that incredibly productive in terms of being able to spin things off that. I mean, what he's talking about there, he's talking about what's called motor cognition, which is that, or what he calls motricity, which is the a theory about the foundations of thought, where this ability that we have to generate abstract thought comes from. And what he says there, and I think he's right, is that it comes from the operation of the sensory motor system. The same brain processes, the same circuits, the same kinds of activation patterns that we use and that our ancestors used, the pre-hominid ancestors used, just to get from A to B, to reach our hand out to a juicy piece of fruit, or to run into a cave when it got dark or when something scary happened. Those same processes are at work, have been kind of remobilized and repurposed to allow us to think things, largely through, I guess, through processes of figuration, things like metaphor. Thinking is internalized movement. But I think one of the things I find interesting is that, or that I've started finding interesting, thinking about, is to do with, how internalized is it really? Because what he's talking about and what other writers in that vein talk about is the repurposing of existing neural circuitry, existing patterns of brain operation that, that were designed or were built by evolution to serve motor purposes, which go on to serve abstract cognitive thinking purposes. But it all resides in the brain, in that kind of thinking. It's all just something that the circuitry does. But I think a lot of thinking, probably all thinking, I'm not sure, but I suspect a heck of a lot of thinking doesn't just take place in the brain, or at least requires other things to be going on in the body at least, and possibly outside of the body, for that thinking to be complete or to fully actuate. I guess I was reminded of this recently with a video that 2B Sirius made, in which I think she was talking about, I might be mixing this one up with something else actually, but I think she was talking about different ways of looking at things, and the examples she used were ambiguous figures. Wittgenstein's duck-rabbit figure, which is this line drawing. If you look at it one way it's a duck, and if you look at another way it's a rabbit. And then another quite famous ambiguous figure of what appears to be a young woman if you look at it one way, and then you look at it another way and it's an old woman. And with those ambiguous figures, and things like Necker cubes, which are also kind of ambiguous figures, the idea of those is that you can think two ways about them. You can think, that's a duck, or you can think, that's a rabbit. I mean, we might call that thinking recognition or something like that, but it's still thinking, isn't it? And it feels like, in one way, it feels like it's actually happening just inside your head, in the way that the motor cognition ideas I just talked about happen inside your head. But when I was looking at those figures, I found it wasn't just happening inside my head at all, actually. What I was doing, and it might be just peculiar to me, is when I'm looking at the duck-rabbit figure, for example, I would actually look at a slightly different point in the page to make it switch. If I wanted to switch it from one figure to the other, or from the young woman to the old woman in that ambiguous figure, I didn't just do something inside my brain. I didn't just turn a switch inside my cognition. I moved my eyes slightly. And it was that slight motion of the eye which brought a slightly different portion of the picture into focus. And that's what caused the switch. So the motion of the eye, and what I'm doing with my body at that moment, is, it seems to me, at least, it's as much a part of that little thinking process as the rest of the stuff. It's a necessary part of it. It's a necessary part of it. And as I say, that got me thinking, well, does it, to what extent is this thinking is internalized cognition? I beg your pardon, thinking is internalized movement. To what extent is that? Is it really internalized? Because in that particular case, yes, whilst most of it's happening in the inside of your brain, inside of your head, inside the box, some of it's happening outside the box, at least with the motion of the eye. And a lot of other thinking, I think, takes place, not with overt motion, like muscular motion like that, or possibly with a little bit of that, but in the kind of biochemistry of the body, you know what I mean? A lot of thinking seems to take place using the biochemistry of the body. Certainly things like judgment. You know, when we apply judgment and something like wisdom and make choices based on previous experience, for example, a lot of that takes place using biochemistry. You know, we know when a decision is correct, not because the you know, the boxes have been ticked in our brain, but we kind of feel it in our body, and that, you know, that's well proven actually. That, so again, it's a kind of motion. It's a biochemical motion, and it is but it's not internalized in the brain. It's taking place out there in the body, and sometimes it takes place not just outside the brain, but in the body, or in the muscles, or in the biochemistry, but actually out there in the world at large, I think. And here I'm thinking about that stuff I've talked about, not recently, but a while back. Some stuff by Maglione and Kirsch, where they did this set of bits of research on what they call epistemic actions, which I really like. Epistemic actions. These are actions that we all perform, physical actions out there in the world, that offload some of the cognitive processing necessities of completing a task onto the world at large. Now, so it's something as simple as you know, counting on your fingers, which you know, it's part of the thinking, isn't it? If you're doing some counting, that's part of the thinking. Yeah, they talked about chess players actually, about chess players moving a chess piece into position to test whether it would be a good move or not. Particularly novice chess players do this. You know, you pick up your piece and you move it, and then you look at it, and then you decide. It's part of the thinking about whether it's a wise move or not. But it's not happening in your brain. It's motion. It's real motion. Motion that's outside in the world. And I think they also do it with people who play Tetris, and why people rotate those figures on the way down, because it helps you think, and you're actually moving some stuff around in the world to help you think. So you're not just thinking with neurons. You're thinking with actions, and even objects. I think. I mean, some of the stuff I'm interested in doing myself. Certainly, some of the videos I make and the objects and stuff I make, like this kind of bunny head thing with the mirrors, that kind of stuff. A lot of the reasons why I do that is because it just helps me think, really. And by that, I don't mean it kind of illustrates the thought I'm having, or it helps disseminate a thought I'm having so other people know about it. It's more about thinking using other means. That's how I regard it. That's how it feels to me, at least. So the thinking that's taking place isn't, as I say, taking place internally. It's taking place through external motion and external object construction. Epistemic objects. Yeah. That's that, really. Yeah.